When did a prank on a teacher go too far? Mrs. Osborne immediately locked the classroom door and screamed. Which one of you thought it was funny to prank call my mother? Last night? A couple of boys in the back snickered nervously. But nobody raised their hand. Eden and Alex were always pulling stupid pranks. So everyone assumed it was them. But they shook their heads when people looked their way. Whoever did it scared her so badly that she had a heart attack. My mother died last night. Because one of you thought it would be hilarious to call and threaten her. The room went completely silent. Even the kids, who never paid attention, were staring at Mrs. Osborne in shock. Someone's backpack fell off their desk and the thud made everyone jump. Nobody is leaving this room until I find out who did it. Police are waiting outside to arrest whoever is responsible. Danica raised her hand tentatively and asked if we could call our parents. Mrs. Osborne shook her head and said not until someone confessed. She pulled her chair in front of the door and sat down with her arms crossed. Her phone kept buzzing, but she ignored it. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Students started whispering to each other, trying to figure out who could have done it. Everyone had Mrs. Osborne's number from the class contact sheet she'd handed out at the beginning of the year. Any of us could have found her mom's information online. Many suggested it might have been someone from another period. But Mrs. Osborne said the caller mentioned specific things from our class. Details only someone in the first period would know. She'd narrowed it down to us 30 students. And wouldn't stop until she had a name. The accusations started flying. People pointed fingers at the usual suspects like Eden and Alex. And someone mentioned that Alexis had been mad about her grade on the last essay. Ian said he'd overheard Lawrence joking about prank calling teachers. Everyone was turning on each other, trying to deflect. Mrs. Osborne just sat there watching us with those red-rimmed eyes. Every few minutes she'd remind us that her mother was dead. Because of someone in this room. The weight of it pressed down on all of us. Some girls were crying, a few guys looked ready to bolt for the windows. I noticed Philip in the corner wiping his face with his sleeve. He was the quiet kid who sat alone and never caused trouble, while everyone else was arguing and defending themselves. He was silently crying. Something about his reaction seemed different from the general panic in the room. The room was getting hot with all of us trapped inside. Someone banged on the door from the outside. But Mrs. Osborne didn't move. We could hear muffled voices. That sounded like administrators trying to get in. She barricaded us in here and wasn't budging until she got her answer. An hour passed, then 2. We missed second period completely. And third was starting. Parents were probably being called. The police were supposedly waiting. Everything was spiraling out of control. Because of one stupid prank call that had gone horribly wrong. Riley started having a panic attack and begged to go to the nurse. Miss Osborne wouldn't let her leave. Marco tried to reason with her, explaining this was kidnapping or false imprisonment. She laughed bitterly and said the police could arrest her after they arrested her mother's killer. That's when I noticed Philip had moved to the back of the room. He was sitting on the floor behind the last row of desks, with his knees pulled to his chest. His whole body was shaking, while everyone else was scared of getting in trouble. He looked absolutely terrified. I made my way over to him, stepping around backpacks and angry classmates. I sat down next to him. He flinched like I might hit him up close. I could see his face was blotchy from crying, and his breathing was ragged. Philip, are you okay? He shook his head and fresh tears started falling. His voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke. The words came out in a rush like he'd been holding them in for hours. It was me. I was dared to do it. Eden said I was too much of a prank call. A teacher. He gave me $20 and said I had to make it scary or it didn't count. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. I just wanted them to think I was cool for once. Please don't let me go to jail. I can't go to jail, I'm only 15. Mrs. Osborne went white. She stood up and started slowly marching over to Philip. Her footsteps echoed across the silent classroom as she crossed the room in 5 quick strides. Philip tried to scramble backwards but hit the wall behind him. She grabbed his shoulders with both hands, and her fingers dug into his shirt. Her whole body was shaking as she stared down at him. Everyone in the class froze completely. Nobody moved or even breathed. Philip's eyes were huge and wet with tears as he looked up at her face. Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Veins in her neck stood out and her face had gone from white to red. I pushed myself up from the floor and took 3 steps toward them. My hand reached out and touched her arm. Her sleeve was damp with sweat, and I could feel her muscles tight under the fabric. She turned her head to look at me, and her eyes weren't the eyes of a teacher anymore. They were just sad and broken and lost just a second. She looked like any other daughter who had lost her mom. Her grip on Philip loosened slightly. The door exploded open with a loud crack. 3 administrators rushed in. 2 security guards right behind them. They took in the scene in about half a second. Mrs. Osborne standing over Philip with her hands on him, and me touching her arm, trying to pull her back. The security guards moved fast. One grabbed Mrs. Osborne's wrists and pulled them off Philip's shoulders, while the other stepped between them. She started screaming as they pulled her away. The same words over and over. She kept saying, "He killed her," and pointing at Philip, who had curled into a ball on the floor. The security guards guided her toward the door, with one on each side holding her arms. She twisted and fought against them the whole way. Her voice got louder as they got her into the hallway. We could still hear her shouting about her mother and demanding justice even after the door closed behind them. The administrator stayed in the room with us. One of them told us all to sit down and not move. More adults flooded in through the door. Some were teachers from other classrooms, and others looked like office staff. They spread out around the room watching us. Mary Barnett walked in about 2 minutes later. He stood at the front of the classroom and looked at all of us. His face was serious but calm. He told us we would each be interviewed about what happened. He said to stay in our seats until called. Philip was still in the corner with his head buried in his hands. His shoulders moved up and down as he cried. A woman with curly hair walked in next. She went straight to Riley, who was still breathing funny and making little gasping sounds. The woman put her hand on Riley's back and spoke quietly to her. After a minute, she helped Riley stand up and walked her toward the door. They left together, heading for the nurse's office. The rest of us sat in complete silence. Nobody wanted to look at each other. The clock on the wall showed we had been trapped in here for over 2 hours. My legs were stiff from sitting on the floor. An administrator came to the door and called out the first name. Kenny got up and followed them into the hallway. 5 minutes later, they called Danica. Then Ian, one by one. They took us out for our statements. Some kids came back to the room after and others didn't. When they called my name, I stood up on shaky legs. The hallway was full of people. Parents were there now demanding to know what happened. Police officers stood near the main office. The administrator led me past all of them to a small room. Inside was the woman with curly hair who had helped Riley. She smiled at me and said her name was Alina LeBlanc. She asked me to sit down and tell her what I saw. I started to explain about Mrs. Osborne locking us in. But then stop, I told her I needed to talk to someone privately first. She looked confused but nodded. She said we could talk in her office where it was more comfortable. We walked down another hallway to a door with her name on it. Inside were 2 chairs and a small couch. Pictures of mountains covered the walls. She sat in one chair and I took the other. I told her everything Philip had said to me. About the dare from Eden, about the $20. About wanting to be cool, about how scared he was of going to jail. She listened without interrupting and wrote notes on a yellow pad. When I finished, she put down her pen. She explained that the police needed to know this right away. She picked up her phone and called someone. A minute later, Gary Barnett walked into the office. Elena told him to sit down, and then asked me to repeat what Philip had told me. I went through it all again. The dare, the money, and everything. His face went from confused to shocked to pale. He rubbed his forehead with one hand. He stood up quickly and told someone outside the door to bring Philip to his office. Immediately, then he looked at me and said, I would need to talk to the police detective who is on the way. I sat in a plastic chair outside Gary's office for what felt like forever. My hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. I typed a message to my mom as fast as I could. The text just said there was an emergency at the school and Mrs. Osborne locked us in the classroom and the police were coming. My phone buzzed almost instantly with her reply, saying she was leaving work right now, and not to say anything to anyone without her there. Put my phone away and watched the chaos building in the hallway. More parents kept showing up, their faces all confused and angry, as they demanded to know why their kids had been locked in a classroom. The secretary kept telling them to please wait, and that Gary would explain everything soon. About an hour later, a woman in a dark suit walked through the main doors. The woman in the dark suit didn't look like the detectives on television, she didn't swagger, and she wasn't wearing sunglasses indoors. Her suit was slightly wrinkled at the elbows, her shoes were scuffed, and she carried a battered leather notepad that looked like it had been through a war. She bypassed the wall of shouting parents without blinking, moving with the heavy momentum of a boulder rolling downhill. Through the glass window of Gary's office, I watched her flash a badge. Gary pointed toward the hallway where I was sitting. Just as she turned her head toward me, the heavy double doors at the end of the hall flew open. "Where is my kid?" The voice cut through the murmurs of the crowded hallway like a gunshot. It was my mom. She was still wearing her blue hospital scrubs, her stethoscope shoved haphazardly into her pocket. Her eyes were wild, scanning the sea of administrators and cops until they locked onto me sitting in the plastic chair. She shoved past a security guard, practically sprinting down the hall. "Mom," I breathed out, my voice cracking. She dropped to her knees right there in the middle of the corridor, ignoring the stairs, and wrapped her arms around me so tight my ribs ached. She smelled like industrial hand sanitizer, stale coffee, and the familiar, comforting scent of vanilla. I buried my face in her shoulder, the adrenaline that had been keeping me upright suddenly crashing. I started to cry, silent, ugly tears that soaked the collar of her scrubs. "I've got you," she whispered fiercely, pressing a hand to the back of my head. "You're safe, I'm right here." She pulled back, her hands gripping my shoulders, her eyes scanning my face for injuries. Before I could explain, the woman in the dark suit stopped next to us. "Ma'am? I'm Detective Reyes. I need to speak with your child." My mom stood up, shifting her body so she was entirely between me and the detective. Her posture was rigid. "You aren't speaking to anyone until you tell me exactly why my child was held hostage by a teacher, and why there are 3 squad cars parked on the front lawn." Reyes didn't flinch. She kept her voice low, professional, but completely serious. "A woman died last night, ma'am. We believe it was the direct result of a prank phone call made by a student at the school. Your child is not a suspect, but they are a material witness to a confession. We need to do this now, while the memories are fresh." My mom looked down at me. I nodded slowly, wiping my face with the back of my sleeve. "It's true, Mom. I heard who did it." Mom set her jaw. "Fine, we go into an office, together. If I don't like a question, we walk out." "Understood," Reyes said. We ended up back in Elena LeBlanc's office. The pictures of the mountains on the wall suddenly looked mocking, too serene for the suffocating tension in the room. Detective Reyes flipped open her battered notebook. She clicked her pen, the sound deafening in the quiet space. "Walk me through it from the moment the door locked," Reyes instructed. I told her everything. I told her about the thud of the backpack, the way the room got impossibly hot, the panic attacks, and Mrs. Osborne's red-rimmed eyes, and then, I told her about Philip hiding in the back. "He said Eden dared him," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He said Eden gave him $20. He just kept saying he was only 15 and didn't want to go to jail. He looked like he was going to throw up." Reyes stopped writing, her dark eyes bored into mine. "Did Philip say what he said on the phone? To the mother?" I shook my head. "No, just that Eden told him he had to make it scary, or it didn't count." "Make it scary," Reyes repeated, her tone entirely flat. "Did he mention a script? A piece of paper?" I paused, trying to rewind the chaotic blur of the last 3 hours in my head. "No, but wait, when Philip was crying, I remember he had his hands shoved in his pockets. He kept crumbling up a piece of lined paper. It was yellow, like from a legal pad. Eden always uses those yellow legal pads for debate club." Reyes wrote that down, underlining it twice. She closed the notebook and stood up. "You did the right thing speaking up. Both of you can go home. School is canceled for the rest of the week." As my mom led me out of the office, I glanced down the hall. Sitting on a bench outside the principal's office was Eden. He didn't look like a kid whose prank had just killed someone. He was slouching, his ankle crossed over his knee, scrolling on his phone. Standing next to him was a tall, silver-haired man in a bespoke suit, Eden's father, a local real estate developer who practically funded the school's athletic department. The man was currently yelling at a very exhausted-looking police officer, using words like defamation and baseless accusations. Eden looked up from his phone and caught my eye. He didn't look scared, he looked annoyed. He tilted his head, giving me a slow, calculated stare, and then deliberately smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was a promise. A chill crawled up my spine. I looked away and let my mom pull me out the double doors into the freezing February air. The next 3 days were a waking nightmare. The local news was ruthless. The headline: "Classroom Hostage Terror, Teacher Snaps After Fatal Prank," played on a loop on Channel 5. News helicopters circled the neighborhood. Mrs. Osborne had been placed on administrative leave and was reportedly in a psychiatric hold at the county hospital. Philip had been arrested, processed as a juvenile, and released to his parents on bail. Eden, however, was a ghost. No arrest, no statements. His family's money had built a fortress around him. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mrs. Osborne's face right before she lunged at Philip. It wasn't just anger in her eyes, it was the absolute, soul-crushing despair of a woman whose world had been stolen for a joke. On Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. "Meet me at the bleachers behind the community park, please, it's Philip." My mom was asleep on the couch, exhausted from taking extra shifts to stay home with me the past 2 days. I grabbed my jacket and slipped out the back door. The park was only 4 blocks away. The air was bitterly cold, the sky the color of bruised iron. Philip was sitting on the top tier of the aluminum bleachers, shivering in a thin hoodie. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He had lost weight, his cheekbones sharp, his eyes sunken into dark, hollow pits. I climbed up and sat a few feet away from him. We didn't say anything for a long time. The wind howled through the metal beams beneath us. "They're charging me with involuntary manslaughter," Philip said finally. His voice was completely devoid of emotion. It sounded dead. "My dad had to put our house up for collateral to pay the bail." "I'm sorry, Philip," I said softly. I didn't know what else to say. "I told the police about Eden. I told them he dared you." "It doesn't matter," Philip let out a bitter, raspy laugh. "Eden's dad hired a team of lawyers. They're saying I acted alone. They're saying the $20 was just me borrowing lunch money. It's my word against his, and I'm the one whose phone dialed her number." He turned to look at me, and the sheer desperation in his face made me sick to my stomach. "I didn't know, man," Philip choked out, tears finally spilling over his freezing cheeks. "I swear to God I didn't know she was sick." "What did you say to her, Philip?" I asked gently. "What did Eden make you say?" Philip reached into his pocket with trembling hands. He pulled out a crumpled piece of yellow legal paper. He didn't hand it to me, he just stared at it. "Eden wrote it out. He told me if I didn't read it word for word, he would tell everyone about some stuff in my locker. He said he had an app that would change my voice to sound like a grown man." I just read what was on the paper. "Read it to me," I pushed. Philip swallowed hard. He unfolded the paper. The wind tried to snatch it from his hands, but he held on tight. "It says, I'm standing in your backyard. I can see you in the kitchen. You're wearing the blue robe. If you try to call your daughter, I'm going to break the glass. If you try to call the police, I'm going to come inside and cut your throat." My blood turned to ice. That wasn't a prank, that was a psychological torture device. "Philip," I stammered, "how did Eden know she wore a blue robe? How did he know her layout?" "I don't know," Philip sobbed, burying his face in his hands, dropping the paper on the metal bleacher. "Mrs. Osborne's mom lives 2 towns over, but the police told my lawyer the police said the back gate was open, someone had been back there, the police thought it was me, but I've never even been to that town." I stared at the yellow paper fluttering against the aluminum seat. A horrifying realization began to piece itself together in my mind. Mrs. Osborne had ruined Eden's life 2 weeks ago. I remembered it clearly. Eden had been caught plagiarizing his final AP history paper. Mrs. Osborne didn't just fail him, she reported him to the academic board. It instantly disqualified him from his early acceptance to Yale. Eden had screamed at her in the hallway, calling her a miserable old bitch before storming out. Eden didn't dare Philip to make a random prank call. Eden had stalked Mrs. Osborne's mother. He had driven to her house. He had stood in her backyard and looked through the window. And then, he used Philip, the quiet, desperate to be liked outcast, as the murder weapon. "Give me the paper, Philip," I said, my voice suddenly steady, completely devoid of fear. Philip looked up, confused. "Why?" "Because Eden didn't just dare you, he planned this. He knew her mother had a heart condition. Mrs. Osborne told us that on the first day of school when she asked us to keep our phones away, but said hers had to stay on in case her mother's heart monitor sent an alert." Philip's eyes widened in horror as the memory clicked for him too. He knew. Yes, he knew, and if the police see this handwriting, they'll know it too. I didn't go home. I walked straight to the police precinct downtown. I practically slammed the crumpled yellow paper onto Detective Reyes' desk. Reyes looked at the paper, then up at me. She didn't scold me for circumventing my mother. She just grabbed a pair of latex gloves, carefully placed the paper into an evidence bag, and looked at her partner. "Get a warrant for Eden Thorne's electronics, cell phone, laptop, iPad, everything," she ordered. Then she looked at me. "You need to go home, right now. If Eden's family finds out you handed this in, they will come after you." "I'm not scared of him," I lied. "You should be," Reyes said grimly. "A kid who can write a script like this without blinking isn't a bully, he's a sociopath." The raid on the Thorne estate happened the following morning. It was the talk of the town by noon. The police didn't knock politely, they executed a no-knock warrant, breaching the mahogany front doors at 6:00 a.m. According to the rumors that leaked from the precinct over the weekend, what they found on Eden's computer was damning. He had used a VPN to search the mother's address, he had accessed Google Earth to study the backyard, but worse, they found a hidden folder on his desktop labeled Retribution. Inside were dozens of photos of Mrs. Osborne's mother's house, taken at night, timestamped 2 days before the phone call. There were also search queries. How much fear does it take to cause a myocardial infarction? And can a minor be charged with murder for a phone call? Eden had spoofed the caller ID to make it look like the call was coming from Mrs. Osborne's own number. That's why her mother answered it so quickly. The police arrested Eden on a Tuesday. I saw the footage on the news. There was no smug smile this time. When the detectives walked him out of his mansion in handcuffs, Eden Thorne looked like exactly what he was, a terrified, pathetic little boy. His father was screaming at the press, shoving a cameraman, but Eden was openly weeping, his knees buckling so much the officers had to hold him up by his armpits. The district attorney dropped the manslaughter charges against Philip. Instead, Philip was charged with a misdemeanor count of harassment and given probation, heavily mitigated by his cooperation and the fact that he was manipulated. Eden was charged with second-degree murder, aggravated stalking, and terroristic threats. He was going to be tried as an adult. 2 months later, spring had arrived, melting the frost and replacing the dead grass with vibrant, painful green. School had resumed, but the first period classroom remained locked. Nobody wanted to go in there. We were moved to a portable trailer out by the football field. Philip came back to school, but he was a ghost. He sat in the back, never spoke, and ate lunch alone in his car. I tried to sit with him a few times, but he would just stare at his hands until I left. I couldn't blame him, he was free, but he would carry the weight of that night for the rest of his life. As for Mrs. Osborne, she never returned to teaching. My mom drove me to the Oakwood Psychiatric and Rehabilitation Center on a Sunday afternoon. I had a bouquet of cheap gas station daisies in my lap. I didn't know why I was doing this. Part of me felt like I needed permission to move on. The facility was quiet, smelling of lavender and bleach. A nurse led me to a sunroom at the end of a long hallway. Mrs. Osborne was sitting in a wicker chair, staring out the window at a meticulously manicured courtyard. She wasn't wearing her usual cardigans or slacks. She wore a gray cotton sweatsuit. Her hair, usually perfectly pinned, was loose and hung past her shoulders, streaked with a shocking amount of new gray. "Mrs. Osborne?" I said softly. She turned her head. For a terrifying second, I thought I was going to see those red, manic eyes that had glared at us while she barricaded the door. But her eyes were just empty. The fire was completely gone, replaced by a dull, hazy exhaustion. It took her a few moments to recognize me. When she did, she offered a weak, trembling smile. "Hello, sweetheart," she murmured. Her voice was raspy from disuse. I sat in the chair opposite her, laying the daisies on the small table between us. "How are you doing?" "They have me on a lot of medication," she said, her gaze drifting back to the window. "It makes things fuzzy. I like the fuzzy." I swallowed the lump in my throat. Eden is in jail. The trial starts next month. He's not going to get away with it. She didn't react to his name. She just slowly rubbed her thumb over the armrest of her chair. "I locked you all in," she whispered, a tear suddenly breaking free and tracking down her hollow cheek. "I scared you. I looked at children, at my students, and I hated all of you. I became a monster." "You were grieving," I said quickly, leaning forward. "You were in shock. You didn't hurt us." "I hurt Philip," she said, her voice cracking. "I grabbed him. I wanted to kill him, a 15-year-old boy. I wanted to wrap my hands around his neck and squeeze until he stopped breathing. What kind of teacher does that? What kind of person does that?" Eden tricked him, I pleaded, wanting her to understand, wanting to absolve her of her guilt. Philip didn't know. Mrs. Osborne slowly turned to look at me, and for a brief second, a flicker of clarity pierced through the medication. "It doesn't matter who knew what," she said quietly. "Evil isn't just a monster hiding in the dark. Sometimes evil is just a boy with too much money and a bruised ego, and sometimes, tragedy is just a desperate kid wanting to be cool for $20. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched the petals of the daisies. "I'm glad you brought these," she said, her voice fading back into that hazy, medicated monotone. "My mother loved daisies." I sat with her for another hour in complete silence. We just watched the wind rustle the trees in the courtyard. When I finally stood up to leave, she didn't say goodbye. She was lost in her own mind, trapped in a prison that no courtroom could ever sentence her to. I walked out to the parking lot where my mom was waiting in the running car. The sky was a brilliant, painful blue. I opened the door, got in, and buckled my seatbelt. Mom put the car in drive, but hesitated, looking at me. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I looked back at the brick building, thinking of Mrs. Osborne staring out the window, of Philip staring at his hands, and of Eden staring at a concrete wall. 3 lives, completely destroyed, all because of a stupid, malicious joke. "Yeah," I lied, rolling down the window to let the cold spring air hit my face. "Let's just go home." As we drove away, I realized that the silence in the car wasn't peaceful. It was the exact same silence that had hung in the classroom after the backpack fell, the heavy, suffocating silence of knowing that sometimes, when a joke goes too far, nobody gets to laugh ever again.